The shouting started just past gate 17. A young man in his mid-20s, hoodie half-zipped and eyes heavy with frustration, stood chest to chest with two TSA officers. People glanced up from their phones and boarding passes. One woman pulled her toddler closer. "I told you, I don't have my ID because it was stolen in Chicago. I filed a report. I have a photo of my passport." "What more do you want?" the young man snapped, holding up his phone. One officer, older and clearly unimpressed, shook his head. "Sir, without physical identification, we can't let you through security. That's policy. You've got my boarding pass. I passed a background check on the spot with that supervisor 20 minutes ago." The line behind him grew longer and the air denser with impatience. A businesswoman sighed audibly. A teenager muttered, "Just let the guy through." But it wasn't just any guy. His name was Julian Peterson. The last name caught the attention of a man 2 rows back who squinted, then nudged his friend. "That's Jordan Peterson's kid," he whispered. "No kidding, that's him." Within minutes, smartphones were recording. TikToks were in the making. A video clip surfaced almost instantly online with the caption, "Jordan Peterson's son thrown out of JFK like a criminal. Unreal." Julian noticed the phones too late. His voice rose, not in anger, but in raw desperation. "My father's name shouldn't matter. This is about basic decency. I didn't do anything wrong." The officers didn't flinch. "You'll need to step aside, sir." "You're creating a disruption." Julian froze. Not again, not another headline, not another social media storm. He turned and walked away from the gate, jaw tight, eyes burning. Behind him, the world kept moving. Flights announced, children laughed, baristas called out names over muffled airport chatter. But Julian, he was unraveling, thread by thread. He found a corner near a Hudson News, sat on his suitcase and stared at the floor. His phone buzzed non-stop. Dad calling. He stared at the screen. He didn't want to answer. Not like this. Finally, he picked up. "Julian?" Jordan Peterson's voice was calm, measured, not angry, just still. "They kicked me out," Julian said, barely holding it together. "Over a missing ID. Cameras everywhere. It's already online. I didn't yell, I didn't even curse, but they—" "I know," Jordan replied softly. "I saw it." Julian waited for the lecture, the careful dissection of every word he'd said, the subtle judgment his father was famous for. But Jordan said nothing for a moment, then, "Stay where you are. I'm coming to New York." Julian blinked. "What? You heard me. You're not— Dad, you don't have to— I said I'm coming." Silence on both ends. And then, for the first time that day, Julian exhaled. Julian had been sitting in the same spot for over an hour. The corner by the bookstore felt like purgatory, neither in the world nor fully out of it. Travelers passed him without a second glance now, the initial wave of attention dissolving into the endless rhythm of airport life. His phone buzzed again. A Twitter notification. "Peterson family drama hits JFK. Again. Entitlement or misunderstanding." The comments were worse. "Another spoiled brat. Why's this news? This is why nobody takes Peterson seriously anymore." Julian locked his phone and buried it deep in his coat pocket. He hated this part, not the public shame that he'd gotten used to, but the way it dragged his father into everything. Julian had spent most of his adult life trying to build a name for himself outside of Jordan Peterson's massive shadow. Now the shadow followed him even into airports. A tap on his shoulder made him flinch. "Sir, we have a private lounge if you'd prefer a quieter place to wait," said a Delta employee, young and apologetic, glancing at his name tag. "It's been arranged. By someone important, I guess." Julian hesitated. It felt like charity, or worse, damage control. But his knees ached, and his mind was too scattered to argue. "Fine," he muttered, dragging his suitcase behind him. The lounge was dimly lit, cold with polished chrome and overpriced snacks. A window faced the runway, where planes taxied in silence. Julian slumped into a leather chair by the glass. His reflection ghosted faintly over the blinking lights outside. He closed his eyes for a moment. But instead of peace, he remembered, His father's lectures at the dinner table, the expectations, the way Jordan would correct him mid-sentence, not to hurt, but to improve. The interviews, the books, the pressure to be better, always better. Julian hadn't asked to be famous or infamous, but he had made mistakes, and the world had been more than happy to remember every single one. The door behind him opened. He looked up, expecting another staff member or maybe a fan wanting a photo, but it was Jordan, travel coat still buttoned, eyes sharp but tired. He walked in slowly, like someone arriving at a battlefield too late to stop the first shots. "You made good time," Julian said, trying not to sound bitter. "Private flight," Jordan replied, taking a seat across from him. "Wasn't about time, was about priority." Julian looked away. "This is embarrassing." Jordan folded his hands, elbows on his knees. "Maybe, but that doesn't mean it isn't important." They sat in silence for a while, not as father and son, but as two men trying to understand where they went wrong with each other, if they had at all. Julian stared at the carpet, running his thumb along the zipper of his duffel bag. "It was humiliating," he said, "not just because it happened, because everyone watched it happen." Jordan didn't interrupt. He rarely did. He waited, the way he always had when Julian was a child, letting silence pull the truth to the surface. "I didn't lose my temper. I didn't raise my voice. But the moment I asked to be treated with basic decency, it turned into a scene. And all anyone sees online is the scene, not the lead-up, not the guy trying to stay calm." Jordan nodded. "That's the curse of public life. The frame they give you is rarely the one you deserve." Julian scoffed. "Yeah, you'd know." There was no malice in his voice, just resignation. Jordan leaned back. "You think I'm here because you embarrassed me?" Julian didn't answer. "I came because when I watched that clip, I didn't see a headline," Jordan said. "I saw my son, exhausted, stranded, and holding it together when he had every reason not to." Julian looked up. "Then why does it feel like I failed again?" "Because you're trying to live in a world that judges you before you speak." Jordan's voice softened. "And because you think every misstep reflects back on me. But it doesn't. You don't owe me perfection. You never did." Julian blinked slowly, absorbing that. "I'm not just your son," he said finally. "I'm trying to be my own man." "But the world won't let me. They look at me and see your books, your talks, your critics, your fans. I'm either too much like you or not enough." Jordan's mouth tightened, not in disapproval, but pain. "I didn't protect you from that," he admitted. "I was so consumed with changing the world, I didn't see how much of that world I was placing on your shoulders." Julian's eyes began to water, but he refused to let them fall. "I didn't want your fame," he said. "I just wanted to get on a plane and visit Mom." Jordan nodded. "And now every time you breathe in public, it becomes a statement." "That isn't fair." Julian stood up, walked to the window, and watched a 737 lift off into the gray New York sky. "I don't need your rescue, Dad," he said, "but I do need your understanding." Jordan joined him by the glass. "Then let me understand you, not as my reflection, as yourself." For the first time in a long time, Julian believed he meant it. They stood there, two figures behind thick glass, invisible to the rushing world outside, but in that moment, finally visible to each other. Julian leaned against the window, watching the airport workers load luggage onto carts below. Every movement felt slow, methodical, so unlike the chaos that had unraveled hours before. "I'm not looking for pity," he said. "And I'm not asking you to fix this." "I know," Jordan replied calmly, "but I also know what it's like to be misunderstood in a moment when you're just trying to hold yourself together." Julian turned to him. "Yeah? When was the last time you were treated like a threat just for speaking?" Jordan's face tightened. "Try 2016 through, well, now." They both chuckled lightly. The tension, while not gone, eased enough to make space for something new. Curiosity. "You ever feel like you created something you can't control?" Julian asked. Jordan met his eyes. "Every day, every time someone misquotes me, every time someone weaponizes my words." Julian dropped into the lounge chair. "Then you get it." "I do," Jordan said, sitting across from him. "But you're not me, Julian. And I think you've spent too long believing you're supposed to be." There was a pause. Julian hesitated, then pulled out his phone and opened the video that had gone viral. He hit play. There he was, shoulders tense, voice tight, eyes wide with that familiar flicker of panic. The moment the officer told him to step aside, the camera zoomed in. His name was trending again. Julian lowered the phone. They'll twist this into some story about privilege or weakness or arrogance. No matter how I act, it'll never be just a missed ID. Jordan reached into his coat pocket and placed something on the table between them. Julian stared. It was a small leather wallet. He opened it slowly. Inside was his original passport. He looked up, shocked. How? It was found in a Chicago cab this morning, turned in by a driver who didn't recognize the name until he saw your photo online. Julian exhaled hard, laughing once in disbelief. You've got to be kidding. I'm not, Jordan said. The universe is messy like that. Doesn't hand you peace, but sometimes it gives you irony. Julian turned the passport over in his hands. So I could have avoided all of this. Jordan nodded. But then we wouldn't be having this conversation. Julian sat back. You think I'm overreacting? No, I think you're responding like someone who's spent too long trying not to disappoint a ghost of someone else's expectations. Julian was silent. Then he said, I think I want to go back to school, study something I care about. Away from all this noise, Jordan's eyes didn't widen, he simply nodded. Then do it. Not because it's right or noble or strategic, do it because it's yours. Julian tucked the passport into his jacket pocket. I'm tired of being a story. Jordan smiled softly. Then start writing your own. The announcement echoed through the terminal. Final boarding call for Flight 482 to Toronto. Gate 21. Julian stood slowly, passport in hand. The room felt smaller now, like something had shifted, not outside but inside him. He looked at his father, who had remained seated, watching quietly. You coming with me? Julian asked. Jordan shook his head. This one's yours. Julian hesitated. It's not just about the flight. You flew here, in the middle of everything you've got going on. I don't even know how to respond to that. You don't have to, Jordan said. Just remember it. There was no big speech, no embrace, no dramatic music swelling in the background. Just a small human moment between two men trying to understand each other better than they did the day before. Julian gave a slight nod, picked up his bag, and walked out of the lounge. As he made his way back to security, he felt the weight of the earlier confrontation pressing on his chest, but lighter now, like the edge of it had been dulled. At the TSA checkpoint, he approached a different agent. This time, he held his passport with both hands. Here you go, he said. The agent glanced at it, nodded, and waved him through with barely a second look. It was so simple, so undramatic. It almost felt unfair how easy it was now. Inside the terminal, he passed the same bookstore where he'd sat for hours, the same Hudson News, the same families and travelers who once stared at him without knowing who he really was. He reached Gate 21 and paused. A teenage girl sitting nearby tapped her mom and whispered, pointing. Julian sighed, but then looked directly at the girl and smiled. A quiet, respectful smile. Not the forced kind, just acknowledgement. Maybe, he thought, that's all it needed to be. As boarding began, he filed into the line with everyone else. No special treatment, no cameras, no confrontation, just a boarding pass and a second chance. He found his seat by the window, placed his bag under the seat in front of him, and stared out at the tarmac. For the first time in weeks, his thoughts didn't race ahead into a dozen disasters or rewind through 100 regrets. He pulled out a small notebook from his bag, one he'd been carrying around for months but never written in. And for the next hour, as the plane lifted into the sky, he began to write. Not about his father, not about the airport, not about the backlash, but about a life he could call his own. The kind built not in reaction to someone else's story, but one authored quietly, patiently, and finally by him. The plane touched down in Toronto just after 11 p.m. The city lights sparkled below like constellations inverted, fragments of clarity waiting to be assembled into something whole. Julian remained in his seat, even after the seatbelt sign blinked off. Around him, passengers sprang into motion, grabbing bags, calling rides, checking watches. But he wasn't in a rush anymore. He looked at the notebook in his lap. The first page was filled, his handwriting small, a little crooked but steady. The entry wasn't brilliant or poetic. It wasn't even finished, but it was his. He stepped off the plane and into Pearson Airport's familiar rhythm. The air was cooler here, crisper, somehow gentler. At baggage claim, he saw his mother before she saw him. She was smaller than he remembered, shoulders wrapped in a thick grey scarf, eyes scanning the crowd. When their eyes met, she lit up, not with relief or pity, but something quieter, acceptance. She opened her arms. He stepped into them. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then she pulled back just enough to look at his face. Rough trip. Julian chuckled. Something like that. They walked to the car together, not talking about headlines or clips or his father flying to New York in the middle of a storm. Just small things. The cold, the traffic, a new Lebanese restaurant she wanted to try. But as they drove through the sleeping city, something shifted again. Julian turned toward her. I think I'm ready to start fresh. School, work. Not running from anything. Not proving anything, she smiled. Then start. It'll take time, he admitted. All good things do, she said. The car rolled to a stop in front of her townhouse. A familiar red door. Same chipped paint on the frame. Same porch light that always flickered twice before turning on. As they stepped inside, Julian dropped his bag and looked around. The same bookshelf. The same ceramic mug he used to steal from the cupboard. But it felt different now. Not like a place he was escaping to. A place he could build from. Later that night, he stood at the window in the guest room, staring at the quiet street below. His phone buzzed once. A message from Jordan. Proud of you, not for handling it well, just for handling it, that's enough. Julian didn't reply right away. He let the words sit, sink in. Then he opened his notebook again. He wrote just 4 more words. Chapter 1, begins again. And he meant it. Not a clean slate, not a perfect life, but an honest one. Real, unfiltered, his. 3 weeks after the airport incident, the clip was still circulating. It had slowed down, sure, replaced by the next viral meltdown or political soundbite, but every so often someone reposted it with a new caption, a new spin. Sitting at a campus cafe, Julian scrolled past it with practiced numbness. His coffee was cold, his notebook open, half a page filled with ideas for a psychology class he'd just enrolled in. He wasn't hiding anymore, not online, not in person. But that didn't mean he felt invincible. Across from him, a student sat down, mid-20s hoodie, earbuds still dangling from his collar. He gave Julian a careful glance. You're him, right? The guy asked. From the airport thing. Julian didn't answer at first. He could lie, or nod, or pretend he hadn't heard, or... But instead, he closed his notebook and said, yeah. The guy leaned back, studying him. That must have sucked. Julian smirked. That's one way to put it. I saw the full video, the guy added. Not just the clip. You held your own. It wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic. You just didn't back down. Julian didn't know how to respond. Praise made him flinch more than criticism these days. The guy hesitated, then said, I got pulled off a bus in high school for forgetting my ID. Security treated me like I was trying to sneak into the Pentagon. I get it. That landed differently. Julian looked up. Yeah? Yeah, the guy nodded. Except no one was filming me and my dad didn't fly across the country to back me up. There was a flicker of something. Bitterness, maybe. But it passed quickly. Julian nodded slowly. He didn't show up because of the cameras. He showed up because I answered his call. The guy considered that. Still, must have been good to have him come. Julian smiled, this time with something real behind it. It was. A long pause stretched between them, etched. The noise of the cafe, coffee grinders, distant laughter, the occasional hiss of milk steaming filled the space. Finally, the student stood. Hey, I'm Sam. Julian. Sam extended a hand and they shook. No fanfare, no awkwardness. See you around, Sam said, walking off. Julian sat back, blinking at the door as it closed behind him. Maybe this was how healing started, not with a dramatic apology, not with a viral reversal, but with a quiet voice in a crowded room. Someone who saw more than a headline, someone who remembered you were human. Julian opened his notebook again and wrote at the top of the page, "Story, the moment after the moment." Because sometimes what matters most isn't the crisis, it's what you choose to do after the world stops watching.